All right, thanks. So I'm Mike O'Neill. I'm a product manager on the Office 365 marketing team, focusing on transition from BPOS to Office 365.
I'm a program manager on the engineering team that's doing a lot of the migration and upgrade tools for BPOS to Office 365.
And Ed and I were just chatting before the presentation. I think some of you may have seen some of these slides through a TAM or in a cab, but we realize this is actually the first time that we're presenting this material outside of an NDA and generally to the public. So it's the first time you'll see some of this. So we're here to talk about the transition from BPOS to Office 365 and how we're going to get you there. Now, from your perspective, really, Office 365 is an evolution of the existing service. We're adding some new features on, but we're keeping the same general value prop, the same, there are no server upgrades. You don't have to do the data migration at all, the same pricing, et cetera. So there's actually a lot of work on our side of the house where we are migrating your data. But from your perspective, it's a transition. It's a new version of the product that you'll have access to. Now, I always like to there are a bunch of sessions talking about new features in Office 365, and I'm not going to dive into those in any great detail. You can get that information elsewhere, but I still can't resist talking about some of them. I mean, the ability to edit a document at the same time in SharePoint, when I first heard of the feature, I was a little skeptical myself, but I've been sitting in an office with coworkers editing the same document at the same time. It's an amazing feature. I heard Ed chatting with a gentleman over there about the voicemail features and how it will transcribe or attempt to transcribe a voicemail into text. That's the greatest loss of productivity ever because you get really funny transcriptions that you have to forward around. So there's some great new features in Office 365 that you'll get after you transition. Now, in terms of what you're going to transition to, it's a like-to-like transition. So if you are SharePoint Online only on BPOS, you'll be SharePoint Online only on Office 365. If you're a full suite customer with BPOS, you'll be a full suite customer with Office 365. The licensing doesn't change, the pricing doesn't change, your renewal date doesn't change. So it's just moving from one version of the service to another. Now, in terms of if any of you have heard of some of the various SKU plans that we have for Office 365, just so you understand, if you're a full suite, what you'll be transitioning to, you'll go to the E1 SKU. And if you want to go to E2 to get Office web apps, if you want to get the Office Professional Plus subscription version of Office, you can upgrade after the transition, so Monday morning after the transition. There are a few SKUs that we are sunsetting. So did anyone purchase additional storage for Exchange? Show of hands? No? All right, well, that's free now. That just comes with the existing service. BPOS, the SharePoint-only deskless worker SKU, that's a SKU that we are deprecating. Just quick show of hands, is anyone using that SKU and I can address that? Otherwise, I can just move forward. All right, that would be a no. And Live Meeting Standalone. So Live Meeting and Office Communicator, they're being merged into one product, Link. So we're not going to offer the Live Meeting Standalone service in Office 365. So the big thing with Office 365 is the system requirements. And I'm guessing that some of you have already heard of this. Let me just run through overall broad perspective of some of the changes. So obviously, there are new features, new offerings. I talked about the SharePoint-only deskless worker SKU. Live Meeting to Link and Office Communicator to Link, that's going to be one big change. In BPOS, there were up to 3 portals that you would have to use. There was the MOAC, the Online Admin Console. There was MOC-P. I can't remember the acronym for the BlackBerry Exchange Server one, but MOSPAC, thank you. There's only one in Office 365. So it's a greatly simplified administrative and experience. Does mean that you'll need to note the new URL for that. And There are new URLs also for OWA, so if people have that bookmarked, they'll need to update that. We are getting rid of the sign-in application for BPOS. So anything that you log in with in Office 365, if it's the first thing that you log in on, that's going to kick off the sign-in point. So that's no longer required. There is a one-time online desktop setup that you'll need to run, and we'll get into the details of what you need to do to prepare end-user desktops in just a moment. There's some new password requirements, and I'll touch those in a bit. And then there are a couple of very big optional features. So one is federated identity. It's essentially single sign-on, and if you implement ADFS, users don't need to use the Microsoft Online username and password. They just log in with their Windows credentials, and that will get them authenticated. There's also an option, I'm curious, does anyone have a hybrid environment where there's an on-premise Exchange server for some users and a cloud Exchange server for others? So a couple, okay. So we have you can install the Exchange Client Access Server role, and that's going to allow sharing free busy information and presence information across those Exchange servers, on-prem and in the cloud. So those are a couple of optional features there. The system requirements. So the big things around the system requirements, Office 2003 is no longer supported. And there won't be any way to connect to Exchange Server in Office 365 with Outlook 2003. And again, quick show of hands, how many folks are still have Office 2003 widely deployed? Okay. So that's going to be a major task, is getting your users upgraded to Office 2007 or Office 2010. Internet Explorer 6 is also not supported in Office 365. We are, as I said before, Communicator and Live Meeting, those are being merged and replaced with one product called Link. So you'll need to, that's not going to be supported in Office 365. And we're replacing the sign-in application, which users had to use every day, with a one-time desktop setup that needs to be run. So I wanted to touch base on the password requirements. We've actually been getting a lot of questions about what this means. And I think the more interesting piece about the password requirements is why we're doing it. So we can't actually share a password between BPOS and Office 365. We just can't copy user passwords from a BPOS server to Office 365. It's different hashing requirements. So the first thing that we do in a transition is we're going to create a copy of your BPOS tenant, basically create all of your users over in a new Office 365 tenant. And what's going to happen over the course of the 3 or 4 months before we transition you, anytime that a user resets or changes their password in BPOS, it will be recorded in Office 365 at the same time. So after the transition, admins won't have to go reset passwords. Users can just log in with the exact same username and password they were using before. But to do that, that means that BPOS has to have the exact same password requirements as Office 365. And it's actually not that big of a change. So I believe BPOS had a 7-character minimum and a 200-character maximum. It's now 8 to 16 characters. We only allow ASCII characters, and we were internally really worried about that because BPOS technically allowed Unicode characters in a password. Turns out there was actually a feature that did not allow Unicode characters to be used in passwords in BPOS, so it's actually not an issue. But that's something that users should be aware of. Also, there are some very rare circumstances where we will grant exceptions to the password expiration policy. In those cases, users will need to reset their password at least once before the transition. So talk more about identity. By default, any Office 365 tenant is going to use Microsoft Online Identity. So they'll have a username, say Michael at contoso.com, at contoso.microsoftonline.com. That's the default. That's what most users will end up using. You also have the option of ADFS. So using ADFS will enable a single sign-on experience. That's a little bit of extra work, but it means that users don't need to remember a Microsoft Online username and password. As a final note, I just want to bring up the system requirements generally. Sir, go ahead. So we actually have an ADFS session right after this one. And so I'm not an ADFS expert, but it's coming right after this. Is it? There you go.
Do you got a quick 2-minute answer for him, though? Not so simple? Okay.
So I just wanted to pause for 1 second on this is a little bit more detail about the system requirements. And just if anyone has any questions about these and the system requirements in general they'd like to bring up now. All right. So I'm going to move over into an overview of what the transition will involve. So roles and responsibilities. Before, if you were looking at a new version of a Microsoft product, moving user mailboxes, moving user data, anything in the data centers, that would be your responsibility. We would be telling you how to do it. And your spouses and partners and folks would be complaining about you being out on the weekend. It's a little bit different this time. I think my wife should be a little bit more worried about whether I'll be available on the weekend than your partners. We're responsible for all the data movement within our data centers. We're responsible for making sure that mail flow is uninterrupted. Really, the key things that we need from customers. Number one, we're going to propose a transition date, and I'll get into exactly how that process works. But we need you to respond. You'll need to cover any end-user training and communications, and we will provide some templated guidance to help out there. There's some work around domain name settings for Outlook and Link. It's actually pretty minor, but that's one thing that you'll need to get set up. And then end-user computers, make sure that they meet the system requirements and they've got everything necessary for transition. Final point, if you do want to update, if you do want to use the single sign-on experience with ADFS, or enable rich coexistence. That's an optional feature that you can enable as well. So I want to go through timeline, and this is one of the things that we have not shared with anyone as of yet, but timeline for transitions. So we're actually, after we GA, we're going to start doing a very limited set of transitions, primarily around Exchange-only customers. We've actually already started this. We did the first 3 customers about 2-3 weeks ago. 4 months after Office 365 is generally available is when the transition window really opens, when we'll be able to transition just about any customer out there. And at that point, we're going to start scheduling transitions over the course of a 12-month period. So basically fall is when the window starts. Now, there are a couple of exceptions here. So BlackBerry transition will start a little bit later than general transition. So we still have some work we need to do with RIM to get those transitions working. So those will start late 2011, early 2012. We don't know the exact date yet. And then is anyone work for a university or has a CASA agreement with us on BPOS? No? Okay. There's an even later date for universities in terms of when we can transition them, but it doesn't sound like that affects anyone here.
So a heavy BlackBerry presence would indicate later?
Yeah, so if a heavy BlackBerry presence, we wouldn't start you out right away. That would be a little bit later of a transition. That's correct. there are 4 phases to the transition experience. So the first one is plan and prepare, and that's actually where everyone in here is. So it's making sure you understand what you need to do to get end user desktops ready for the transition, get any training you need in place, and figuring out when exactly you want to transition, because we're going to ask you, and we will do our best to give you the time frame and the date that you need. The transition itself will occur ideally over a weekend. If your business needs it to not happen on a weekend, let's say it's a hospital or most of your users are online during the weekend, we will work with you to find a transition time during the week. But generally speaking, we're going to do it Friday evening through Sunday evening so that Monday morning, everyone can come in and they can just log in and start using Office 365. During that 48-hour period, and Ed will get into this in a little bit more detail, email flow will be uninterrupted. SharePoint will be locked. It'll be read-only for a certain period of time. Monday morning, there's the configuration period, and it's just making sure, can users log in? Are they having any particular issues? So getting everyone back up to speed. There's also some work around reconnecting mobile devices. And then there's new deployment, and I want to. Essentially, these are both the same thing. It's Monday morning. It's getting the new features up to date and activated and getting all the users ready to go. I really want to recommend that you separate those two out. So priority 1 should be making sure that all users are good to go, that everyone, if they didn't reset their password, that they can log in, everyone's running fine. Wait a couple of days before deploying ADFS and before kicking off a lot of the new features. If something goes wrong, if you need to call us for support, it's a lot easier for all of us if we're just dealing with the transition issues and we haven't added in a mix of ADFS and rich coexistence. So it's really optional, but it's something we highly recommend. Configuration and new deployment are 2 separate phases. So the question was, will transition include EHA? Yeah. So what we do for EHA is we enable the EHA service on both BPOS and Office 365, so there won't be any loss of compliance. So everything will be kept the whole time. And the transition experience, I'm going to hand that over to Ed.
So thank you, Michael. So what I'm going to go through is a transition experience for a hypothetical company with some dates and go a little bit more detail here as we step through each one of these processes. And as Mike mentioned, a lot of this is kind of behind the scenes, so you actually don't have to worry about that. Good thing for you. Anybody that has done an upgrade, whether it's a Windows Server upgrade, an Exchange upgrade, knows the challenges there. So we've got a whole team dedicated to make the back end work correctly. And my team specifically has been doing a lot of the engineering work, how we're actually going to transition, what happens when do you lock, when do you unlock, when do you move data, what's the client experience, does EHA work, continue to work, all those issues. So let me walk you through a very quick sample of a hypothetical situation for a company. So what's going to happen is we decide that this company should be transitioned over here in sometime around November 7th. So working back on that schedule to the left, we say, okay, let's actually start thinking about November 7th way out in as early as mid-August. So sometime in August, you're going to get an offer. Basically, hey, we're ready to move you on November 7th. And that offer will come in form of an email. It'll also come in form of the V1 MOAC, the admin console that the admin administrator logs onto. They'll see a message that actually says, hey, your company is being offered a migration date. And then I'll show you in a moment what your options are at that point. So let's say you accept that this customer accepts the transition date on 8/20. They've had some internal discussions. They've figured out what they need to do. 8/20, they say, we're good to go. Let's choose November 7th as our transition date. Really, at that point in the game, after they click and accept on the Microsoft Online admin console, then they can actually start doing some preparation for transition. And I'll go into more detail what those steps would be. And then somewhere about a couple weeks before that transition weekend, before the 7th, this is the time to think about your users. For those that need to upgrade to Office, or Outlook 2007 or Outlook 2010. That may be the right time sweet spot to actually do it. Obviously, if you've got a large user population, you probably want to do this a lot earlier. We've got lots of customers with large end user communities, so they'll have to probably phase this out even longer. But this is for just as a sample for maybe a medium-sized company. So then the actual transition happens. At the very bottom, you see this 11/5 to 11, this transition weekend. That's when the magic happens. That's when we actually do your finalization. We'll move all the last bits of data across, start making V1 administrators to V2 administrators. Everything starts to happen there. And then finally, after that transition, basically the V2 system is ready to go. And your users can start using the system that day after, as well as your administrators. And really, if you don't have any more business in V1, you're done. You're on Office 365. So let's go through this in a little bit more detail. So the pre-transition state. So let me dive into that a little bit more. So the administration I mentioned, you're going to get an offer date. You're going to say, yes, that looks good. I have accepted it. Or you can choose an alternative date. Then really what you need to do, start thinking about is there are some DNS records that you need to do. These weren't really hard requirements in the BPOS V1. For example, DNS Autodiscover really wasn't needed. We did some special things with this V1 sign-in client. But starting with Office 365, any new Office 365 customers, including the ones in this room, you need an DNS Autodiscover record. Probably need to update the SPF record because the way email flows out of the system is going to be different, so you'll need to add those specific records. Also, Link Online also uses the equivalent of what Outlook does for Autodiscover. So there's a DNS SRV record that needs to be set up for Link. So any of your users that starts Link automatically will self-configure. So those are the main DNS records you need to set up. Also during this transition period, might be the time to actually say, hey, it's great that Microsoft says this is going to be really smooth and easy, but I'm going to actually go make sure that it really is. So this might be the time where you actually go take a couple of test mailboxes or administrator mailboxes and actually move them across to Office 365 just to see what the experience is like, see what the client reconnect experience is like, etc. So this would be the ideal time to kind of iron out any kinks and also for yourself to set your own expectations of what you think is going to happen. Also, for many of the customers in the BPOS V1 that are running an on-premise to V1 directory sync, there is a new directory sync. So what's going to happen there is you're going to actually have to uninstall the old on-premise to V1 sync and use the new one. Again, in this particular case, if you're not comfortable waiting for that Monday after the transition to do all that, this would be the good time to actually test it out and see if it works as you expect. How do you configure it, etc. Unfortunately, there's not today a way to do that with the actual company you're going to migrate into in Office 365. So our recommendation is do it with a throwaway company. Go sign up for a trial in Office 365, directory sync into it, just so you know what the experience is like, what the configuration is, and when you're happy with that experience, then throw away that company, and then you know what you're ready to go. Yes, Russ. Yeah, that's right. So you do have to be careful with the domain name because the domain name that you're going to use in your real company that we're migrating to should be, the one that you do. So use something that you can again throw away. You don't really care about in terms of a practice domain name, etc. End users, we say, make sure you guys have Outlook 2007 or 2010 installed, and then guide users to install Link 2010, and also running Office 365 desktop setup. And I'll show you that in a second. So end user transition, they continue to use the sign-in client just like they always have, but now they should actually be receiving some information like, hey, there is a transitioning happening, this is the approximate time, this is what's going to happen, this is what you should do. Get your desktops ready again. Install Link, run Office 365. And Office 365 does two very important things. And I'll show that in a second, but let me jump over to my console. Okay, so let's go over here. Now I'm going to cheat a little bit because we have a little bit of some cryptic usernames and passwords for these test systems. So I just cut and paste here. So normally this is what you see when you log into the V1 admin console. So what's going to happen is what you're going to see is this gold bar at the top. It's a little bit hard to read, but it says a date for your transition to Office 365 is available. Confirm your date now. When you click on that, you're going to see the date that's being offered. So it'll say November 5th. I have really a couple options here. I can say, yep, November 5th is good. I'm going to take it. When you hit that confirm button, that actually sets in motion the workflow in our back-end systems. That date gets now set pretty much in stone in our system to get you start going. Everything will start working for that migration date. Now, of course, if you have a change of heart and say, you know, I said that back then, but I'm not really comfortable with that date. Something's come up, some other IT project has higher priority. Then obviously you can come back and talk to us, escalate back to support, and we can change that date. But once you do click this, we hope that most of you go with that date. You also have the chance to, if you don't like November 5th, you can say, hey, I want to go 1 month, 2 months, 3 months after that. Or for some people, hey, I want to even go later. And some people want to go as early as possible. So one thing I wanted to get some feedback on, if this was your company and I said to you, hey, November 5th, are you guys going to be ready? How many of you would raise your hand and say, yeah, that's a date I can go? Okay. How many would go after that date? Okay, and how many before could go earlier? Okay, keep your hands up for the ones that can go earlier. Could you go as early as July? Okay, July, August, September. Okay, so we have some early ones. So about a third, something like a third could go early, a third could go late. Okay, that just gives us some feedback. Where we put these proposal dates of and where you're going to do where we're going to do the batches. So obviously you can come back and say, hey, I want to go later, I want to go sooner. So we give you some flexibility. Once you do confirm, we put up something else here. It says basically who the administrator was that said, yeah, I agreed to this date. And now you'll just see this status, which is your transition is on November 5th, whatever the date was that you've accepted. Okay, so now I'm going to jump over to so the administrator has said, yes, I like November 5th. And now, in terms of the transition experience, we are going to start asking some users to get ready for that experience. So one of the first things we're going to say is, obviously install, upgrade to the right version of Alphas and Outlook. If you have that, that's great. But the other thing is we're going to say is, hey, run something called Office 365 Desktop. And to do that, go over here to portal.microsoft online and you enter in your username and password. One more time. So when you come over here, this is what your users are going to see. And we'll have explicit templated instructions to say, okay, when you get here, you want to click on the downloads page. If you need to install the link client, here it is. Choose the version you need. I've already installed it on this client, so I'm not going to run that. But here's the most important. This is where the Office 365 setup actually happens on step 2. Okay, and I'm going to get prompted one more time for my username and password. And this is what happened there was it actually was smart enough to go in to determine what company you're associated with in Office 365, and it noticed that, hey, I have the BPOS suite SKU, which means I have Exchange, SharePoint, Live Meeting, or OC, instant messaging service. So it'll light up exactly what needs to be configured. Now I've already configured Outlook, so I'm going to uncheck that one, but I haven't done these two, so I'm just going to leave SharePoint and Link. And what it actually did was configure some unique settings in the system. And basically that's it. And you're finished. If for some reason you don't want your users to do this, or maybe you're more comfortable pushing out the changes out manually through GPO or some other method, then we do actually show you exactly what we did in that desktop setup. It's under the help section, and it actually gives you much more detail what we did. It actually looked to see what version of OS was there, what patches were needed. So you can see if you were running SP3, there was a specific KB patch, Vista. We all installed the IDCRL7, which is the sign-in system for Office 365. If you had 2007, it had some other additional updates. If you ran 2010, it had other additional updates. So it checked and did all that. And also it did some specific registry key settings for Lync and also for SharePoint. So as I mentioned, if you're not comfortable having users do that Office 365 desktop setup, you can have an option to push these other changes out in other methods down to your desktops. So I mentioned that you're going to instruct users to do this. What was the most important thing about that experience for the users? Anybody catch the slight nuance there?
How did you get that page? Because if they sign on, it's totally different. Is that only when you're provisioned?
So yeah, so you're saying how do they get to that page? So let's assume that you tell them, hey, go to this URL to go do your logon. Yeah, so yeah, you're basically onto it. So one of the most important things that happened there was I used the same credentials I use in my current V1 system to log on to V2 to run that desktop setup. That is the most important thing, because if you tell your users to do this ahead of time, you're going to find out right away if something went wrong with the sync of the password from V1 to V2. If they can't log on and they swear to you, hey, this is my V1 password, I cannot log on to Office 365. You want to know about that way ahead of time. You don't want to wait till that Monday after we make that transition when there may be a whole boat of users in that same situation. So by virtue of me running that Office 365 setup, I validated my password sunk across from V1 to V2. So you want to get that validation as early as possible, as well as the side benefit of course, of preparing all the desktop pieces. So that was the point I wanted to emphasize. So there's a side benefit of running this desktop setup, which is to validate that the passwords got across. Okay. So that's what the users are starting to do. They're preparing and to make that transition. Now this is the next phase, which is the actual transition weekend. So this is when, let's say sometime around Friday, 6 p.m. Pacific time, I'll just say that's roughly the time frame, is when we actually go into this final transition for the company. So what's going to be the admin and user experience? First of all, for the V1 administrator, we will lock the admin console because we don't want anybody to make any changes at this point. We're kind of in the final stages of moving all the data, so we can't take any more changes, so we'll lock it. You can still get read access. You can do certain things like reset passwords, which I believe you still can do. We're still finalizing the details there. But in terms of like adding users or changing your licenses, that's going to be kind of in a locked phase for that, starting that Friday in the transition. User experience. So Exchange mailboxes will start to move across. So it'll trickle across, right? So if you have 100 users, it's not like we do it all together. Some user 1 may go early on that transition weekend. User 100 may go a little bit later. So, but as it happens, the Outlook will stop working in V1 and will start to rework in V2. They will be prompted for Outlook to restart Outlook when the transition happens. Outlook Web Access, Michael mentioned that there is a new URL, so that's part of the user education. Say, hey, don't use the old URL anymore in V1 for OWA, use the new one. Likewise, mobile devices will have to be reconfigured. SharePoint sites will still work. The old SharePoint URLs that are sprinkled in emails and documents, those will still work. There'll be a special redirection that happens so that when users click on it, they'll actually get to their new Office 365 SharePoint URL. There'll be also a set of new URLs, but we're designing the system so that we preserve all those URL links. But during the lock, you can't change any more of the SharePoint documents. They're in read-only mode. OCS and live meeting, they continue to work, and I'll show you why in a moment, why they're the exception. And then finally, there's the post-transition steps. So this is the Monday after. or the day after your migration, your clients should be reconnecting at this point. You should be validating the experience for them. The administrators probably at this point, reiterating, hey, remind yourself, this is new OWA, this is how you reconnect the ActiveSync devices, your Windows mobile devices. So the things that Michael mentioned, once you're in a stable state, you can now do some additional things and restart V2 directory sync from on-premise, for example. If you so choose, ADFS, Exchange-Rich Coexistence, if those are options for you. So from an end user perspective, it's pretty nice. The users are logging on to Office 365 with the exact same credentials that they used in the V1 system, so there's no monkeying around with changing passwords and things of that nature. They will, actually, the instruction should be, the way they use the service client today to log on, keep doing that. Even the day after the transition, keep using they're probably already accustomed to doing that, starting the service client and clicking on Outlook or going to the home portal and using SharePoint. Those behaviors, they don't have to switch out of that mode immediately on that Monday. They can just continue doing that. Outlook will, like I mentioned, Outlook will prompt them for a restart. They will preserve the OST when we do this migration. So as many of you know, when you transition from an on-premise Exchange mailbox into the BPOS V1 system, we didn't have any capability to do that. We forced you to recreate an OST, and a lot of people didn't like that because you lose a bunch of different things with your Outlook profile, rules, special configuration things. So in this particular case, we're not requiring that at all. Everything you had before should just continue working. So what's interesting are the last two bullets. What will happen after this post-migration is because they're still logging into the sign-on client, we'll actually have detected that the mailbox has moved, and we'll have detected the company has finished migrating. We're actually going to push a registry change down to the client that basically forces Outlook to use the auto-discover record that you set up as a pre-configuration. So we'll actually detect that and do that automatically. We will also disable the auto start and auto log on for the service client. And we haven't figured out how is the best, most elegant way, but after probably 7 to 14 days, we recommend that the users don't really need the V1 service client anymore. If your company has finished migrating, they can go ahead and uninstall that. That's just one legacy client piece that's no longer needed. So behind the scenes, again, these are the things you guys don't have to worry about, but our engineering team does have to worry about. So how does all this stuff really happen? So one of the things that we're going to do is we're going to do a back-end sync. So basically from the current BPOS system into Office 365, we will sync all our paid tenants into the infrastructure. And what happens there is, it's very important. Basically, a footprint gets created in Office 365 ready for you to move to. And this represents your company information as well as all your users. So that's all ready to go. On the back end, OCS, or the Link Online service, there is a one-time upgrade on the back end. So this actually happens even before you guys migrate. So what happens to your end users, they'll continue to use the OC service, but unbeknownst to them, they're actually using the new version 2 version of the service. They don't have to change anything. They'll just continue to be just reconnected to the new service. So in effect, that service, you kind of get pre-migrated to that in one shot very quickly. But again, there's nothing noticeable from the client side. When we actually migrate you, like in that example where I said November 5th was the migration date for this hypothetical company, we will run migration batches. So each migration batch is done every week, and it will have X number of companies in each batch. So we'll start probably very small, and then we'll get bigger, and eventually we'll scale to where we can do thousands of companies every week. And this is when the actual tenant migrations happen on that finalization weekend. So just kind of the phases, what kind of recap what happens in the back. In the middle is the customer using the V1 service. On the far right is the V2 service. And I'm just going to walk through very quickly what happens. So first of all, the first thing we do is say, hey, this customer, we want to put them in the November 5th batch. Let's go ahead, before that we do the directory sync. So this is the part where we take the V1 instance of your company and sync it across to V2. In V2 on the far right, there's something called MSODS, which stands for Microsoft Online Directory Services. it's the master AD in the V2 system. And when that sync happens, we also sync into Live for the Live IDs. We also sync into SharePoint, Exchange, every one of our workloads where you actually need a presence as well. So there's this huge sync that happens. And then the next important thing is we put you in the batch. We'll say, okay, this company should be in the November 5th batch. And then we trigger something in the Active Directory that says that, which then lights up the offer date to the administrator. The administrator then can approve or select another date for migration. Once they've accepted, that acknowledgement puts them in the batch, and they're ready to go. So now the next phase is, as that date gets closer, a couple weeks ahead of time, we start pre-migrating the data. So that basically means we start moving the data across ahead of time before that actual transition happens. Because typically for a large company, there's a lot of data to move. So we'll start staging the data across. We'll also start prepping the SharePoint sites and pre-copying the mailbox. And finally, when that transition weekend happens, that's when we put the V1 BPOS admin console into lock. You cannot directory sync. You cannot change any user attributes, any tenant properties. You cannot add any more licenses. And then finally, when we do the final migration, we start moving the SharePoint content, finish the mailbox moves, and then the last phase, which will probably happen in the last part of that weekend, is we do finalization. So we start to make sure that all the Exchange domains, FOPI, the forefront online protection for Exchange, has converted the domains. The licenses have moved across to the new instance, and that's when you're kind of in the final phases. So I want to do one last demo. So let's see here. What do I have? Might ask me to log in. So here was so this is a company. So I'll just tell you what was happening in this company. This company has not been finalized, but we've already migrated a few mailboxes. So this is a company that's in that transition weekend. So obviously I have some special admin rights where I can go look at things here, but for most administrators, they're not going to do this kind of thing. But certainly from the back end, we can see. So this company's got many, many users that are going to be migrated across. And I'll show you what the footprint of that company already in Office 365 looks like. So this is the Office 365 company. So for every user that you saw over here on the V1 system, there's already users over here ready to go. And they've been sunk across, and they're right now in some state of migration. So in this particular case, I'm doing a mailbox migration. So, and I can tell you a little bit more about what's happening. So this is a command I ran earlier. This is Remote PowerShell. This is also a feature in Office 365 if you have Exchange. Not only can you administer Exchange through the Exchange console, but you also can deep dive and do very specific Exchange PowerShell commandlets. So I ran this command earlier. I'm not going to do it again because it takes a little bit of time. But basically I said, how many users are in this Office 365 company? And there's 404 right now. And then I said, get mailbox. So this is going to take a second, but basically it shows 9 mailboxes. So these 9 mailboxes have finished migrating, but obviously I have a lot more to go. So there's 404 users, and I would probably guess that majority of them have mailboxes. So we know though that these 9 mailboxes are already finished. And I can take user 22. User 22 I know has completed. I can actually find out a little bit about user 22. So I can get his mailbox information. So here's his new Office 365 mailbox. There's a lot of data here about what's in the mailbox, but it's already provisioned in the system and it's ready to go. I can actually do now something more interesting. for user 22. I can actually go look at the history of when we moved him and what happened. So you can see his status, his migration is completed. And actually, if I do this, I can actually get a lot more detail. So it actually, you can tell when it was completed. You can see here the request style was a cross-org migration. So that means basically we moved him from BPOS V1 over to V2. And if I really want to find out much more about what happened in his migration, I can get his statistics for his actual migration. And then it'll give me much more verbose information. So you can see roughly on May 10th, this was completed. You can actually see what mailbox server it came from, where his destination server was. So a lot more information. And this is, again, nothing you have to worry about, but we'll be monitoring these things on the back. Every time one of our tenants is moving, we have a reporting system that's constantly querying the system, making sure everything gets across correctly. But I did want to give you a little bit of just high-level view of what happens in the background. So before I jump into what additional sessions, so I just want to recap. So we talked about pre-transition, user transition, getting ready for the desktop, validating that the users have the same passwords, making sure that it happens. And then that weekend is when we actually do the final data migration, where we lock the system. So there is, from an administration viewpoint, be aware that you're not going to be able to get into the system until sometime after Sunday midnight. But come Monday morning, all your administrators will be able to get in, and your users should be able to reconnect pretty cleanly on the system. There will be some education on, hey, this is now the URL for OWA, et cetera. So that was the high-level view. We do have, I mentioned at 3:15, Ross, who was speaking, if you want to know about ADFS, he's got the session, B314. If you have more questions about transition migration, Mike and I will have a session tomorrow in B304 at 3:15. And for those who have RIM questions, we are doing a special session tomorrow at 10:30 in this building, or in the building over here, Building B, called the Authority Boardroom. It was hard for me to find where this boardroom was, but it's basically where the shuttle buses park outside if you just walk directly in. It's one of these fancy conference rooms with wood doors. But RIM is actually here to talk about what's happening with BlackBerry and Office 365. Unlike the V1 service, where we stand up BES servers today in our Microsoft data centers and run them, RIM is actually offering the hosted BES service in the cloud. And they're going to connect into your mailbox infrastructure. And they'll also have an administration portal, much more sophisticated capabilities. So if you're interested, find out more about that. I encourage you to come to that session Wednesday, tomorrow at 10:30. So I think we're wrapped up.
I just realized I omitted one slide in this presentation about how we're going to schedule transitions. So shortly after Office 365 is generally available, I'm going to send a survey out to the admin contact in every tenant, and basically it's going to ask, do you want to transition this fall? Do you want to transition next fall? In the winter. So you'll select a time frame, and we will use that. Just like when Ed was asking to see a show of hands, we'll use that for trying to schedule an exact date. And if you really need a very specific date, you can call up support, or you will be able to call up support and say, hey, I actually need to go this specific weekend. Can you help me out? We'll do our best to honor those requests. I mean, if we have two 20,000 seat customers that want to transition the same weekend, we can't do it. But other than that, we will try very hard to meet any kind of scheduling needs that you have. Sir, go ahead.
The requirements for Internet Explorer and Outlook, is it like limited functionality they don't, or is it just simply all?
So for Outlook 2003, you simply won't be able to connect. For IE6, you can connect, I think I tried it out with SharePoint, and it made me try to re-log in every time I clicked a link. It's really not a great experience on IE6. You can still use SharePoint with Word and PowerPoint 2003. It's just you're checking the file out, downloading a local copy, and then opening it up in those applications, saving, and then rechecking it in. So it's not as great or rich of an experience. One of the things that I do point out, like comparing Outlook 2003 to Outlook Web App for Exchange Server 2010, the OA experience is far better than the Outlook 2003 experience, and that's definitely an option if you have a couple of users or a couple of desktops that are going to be they just don't have the power to handle more modern Office. That's definitely an option because it really is a better experience. Other questions, sir?
There's no mention made of applications, devices, or IS doing SMTP relays. I'm assuming that's still going to be pretty much the same as an IP change, or?
Yeah. So for apps that are doing SMTP, et cetera, yeah, you just need to change the address. It's a Monday morning task to make sure that that's updated.
Yeah, that's
Sir.
a great question. I'll add that.
Sir, you had a question?
A couple. We have some SharePoint users. We have some external partners.
Mm-hmm.
Their computers aren't on our domain. We give them BPOS accounts. We say SharePoint only at our company's domain, and they don't have a single sign-on client. They browse to the SharePoint link we sent them.
Mm-hmm.
It does the pop-up. They log in using that account, and they're able to hit the SharePoint. Is that going to change significantly? I mean, are they going to be required to go through this portal and install the stuff on their computer? It's not our company. It's just you're a partner that works with us.
Right.
Yeah, you just want to give them, and they normally would just have some shared access to collaborate with your employees. Yeah. Yeah, you got that. Yeah.
So it does change. Sit on. There we go. So it does change a little bit in Office 365. You don't need to create accounts for them in that sense anymore. There's a couple of ways of doing it. SharePoint in Office 365 is what they call the extranet feature. Okay. So they can actually use a live ID to come to the site, and you can authorize that. If they have an existing tenant, they can use other Office 365 accounts to come in. So I think in this transition, what you probably do is once it's been moved across, is kill off those accounts that aren't part of your domain, and then get them to use a different way of authenticating in, so that you don't have to manage them as part of your rules.
Okay, great. Thank you. And then, additionally, are we going to have to make any special accommodations for? We have log shipping for legal compliance. We have a third-party log shipping that does legal discovery on BPOS. Do we need to make any accommodations during the transfer to ensure that log shipping still happens? We're a global company, so Friday through Sunday is kind of Thursday through
Right.
Saturday.
Sure.
Areas
Right.
of the world. And static passwords. Can you just touch on exactly if we're going to have to make any special accommodations there?
So in terms of static passwords, you're saying accounts that have an exception to the password reset?
Computer challenge.
Right, the CEO. So the CEO will need to reset his or her password once before the transition. If that doesn't happen, they just won't be able to log in on Monday morning. The admin will have to reset the password. So yes, they will have to do that once. In terms of the log shipping?
So yeah, we should probably talk a little bit more about how you're using the log shipping today. So I assume that you're doing some type of mail coexistence today. Are you have mail routed?
Well, before Microsoft offered the archival.
Yep. Yeah. Yes.
Your preferred partner was liveoffice.com. So we have log shipping with liveoffice.com specifically for legal and compliance issues. So you go to their, it's a
Got it.
third-party
Got it.
website, blah, 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 blah.
Right.
We use that. We've been using that for some time.
Yeah.
What do I need to
So
do?
we probably had to do did we have to do a special configuration in V1 for you to make that work? Yeah, it's either a journaling rule or some type of transport rule, possibly. Yeah, so we will recreate those. So one of the things we do before we do a batch, we actually look for all these custom settings that we did, whether it's no password expiry or journaling rules. There's some other managed folders, etc. So we'll do a check and we'll reach out to each tenant saying, hey, we've noticed that these are special configurations. Do you wish to preserve them as you transition to 365? If it's one of those that we can detect. But I'll talk to you offline about that one. And also you want to take the time zone one?
Yeah, I was about to take the time zone one. So the start and end time of the transition, it's going to be determined by the data center in question. But I think it's really what you're getting at is outages and who's going to be offline at any given time. The way to really look at it is that SharePoint will be read-only during the transition. Other than that, users will continue to receive email. So, if you're on at 2 a.m. on Saturday night, and that happens to be when we're transitioning your email box, and you're in Outlook, Outlook is just going to say, I need to restart. And you just have to quit, you open it up, and it reconnects. IM will be working throughout the whole time. In fact, for the IM transition, we actually do everyone, we're going to do that sometime in the fall. It'll be 60 to 90 days after GA. So everyone will be on the new platform. So live meeting will continue to work. Instant messaging will continue to work. So it's really SharePoint. And then for mobile devices won't auto reconfigure like Outlook does. So you're going to want to make sure you get out the information of this is how you need to reset your iPhone or your Windows phone or what have you. Because when the mailbox transitions, they'll just have to go and repoint to a new server. So you get that out to everyone beforehand, and they should be fine.
Yeah. Quick question, raise of hands. How many can probably do a cutover, like what whether it's a weekend or some 2-day period? Do most people think they can do a cutover in one shot, or will they need a multi-phased migration, like 20% of the company goes in week 1, 20% goes in week 2? How many will need to do multi-phased migration? Okay, yeah. So I think that's also part of the question because schedules, or I just have too many users to move. I'm not going to be able to do it over a short 2-day period. We are developing the plan for multi-phased migrations, and you're probably basically how it's going to work is, as you get X percentage across each week migrated to O365, you're basically in a brief coexistence period until you finish that last user off of this old system. Yes, question?
Sure.
The proposed date, yeah. So what we'll do is for multi-phase, we'll probably say, hey, this is a proposed date. How many phases would you need? And we'll have to lock in some plan. I briefly. I'm sorry. Yes, correct. This is kind of what I say, net new feature we still have to design. Now, one of the things, we do have some, we already know basically how we're going to do it, the building blocks anyways. So I mentioned one of the things you can do is a pilot of a mailbox. That means like, hey, let me go test this out, because I'm not sure about this migration thing that Microsoft's offering. Let me move 5 mailboxes across over there. And once they're over there, and you see what the client reconnect experience is like, things working, mail flow between those piloting mailbox and your V1 environments working, and vice versa. So basically, that's kind of the way it's going to work. Likewise for SharePoint. If you have SharePoint, you're probably going to have to keep the SharePoint until everybody's really off the system, or there'll be a redirect that happens to the new SharePoint content. So there's a few more pieces where we're putting together to make the whole story complete. But we have to support that because a lot of our customers won't be able to move quickly.
Yeah, let me address that. So, are you a Premier Support customer? Okay, so you're going to work directly with your TAM. Your TAM is responsible for making sure that Ed and I know what the issues are. Any special requests. If you're not a Premier Support customer, we don't actually have the cutoff yet, but let's say it's around 10,000 mailboxes. If you have more than 10,000 users, we're going to contact you anyway, because that's going to be tough for us to do in one weekend. So we'll reach out to you if you don't already have a TAM and say, hey, we want to do this. We will probably have a lower cutoff as well. Say we'll reach out to you directly And yeah, I think we're talking about a list of, you'll be able to give us a list of users that you want to do in different batches. It's, again, net new feature, so we haven't worked out all the details, but we had a couple of calls with some customers this week just to talk about how would they want to do it and what's the best way to collaborate on that. Sir?
I don't believe it was mentioned, but will all your safe senders and safe IPs magically move over too?
Safes, yes, those are preserved. Safe senders, block senders, yep, absolutely.
Sir?
In the I guess the coexistence model you're talking about, is there going to be still gal sync between the two environments?
Between the V1 and the V2, yes. So very early on, in essence, when we do the directory sync for our entire data centers, you will have representation in the gal across. And very similar to when you, for some customers who move from on-premise into the cloud, who'd set up directory sync, it's kind of the same model. As a matter of fact, that directory sync technology we're still leveraging the same core technology. So you will have the gal represented. Yep, absolutely, on both sides for your own users.
Sir?
Will that transition cause problems with delegate relationships or access to everything else?
Yeah, so the question is, will kind of a phased migration cause some issues with delegate access, permissions? Yes, absolutely. You do have to be sensitive to that. So you're moving the exec's mailbox, and his assistants, his team may probably want to be together in that batch if they have any type of delegate relationships. So it is a caveat to think about that. I'm sorry? The question is, what about the gal? The gal will be fine because you'll have representation of the same gal over in the Office 365 environment as you have in the V1 system. Addresses, mailboxes, when you say reply, or where you pick somebody from the address book to reply to, it's built from the gal, there will be no issues in terms of mail send or replyability. Everything is preserved there.
Sir?
With the gal, in order that to work with on-premise and in the cloud,
Yes.
Office 365, you said you have to install like a CAS role. Isn't that only Exchange 2007?
So you're talking about rich coexistence. So, yeah. So for rich coexistence, it's the specific feature that people complained to us about that we didn't offer in BPOS V1 wasn't Mailflow or GalSync. That's all available today. It was specifically people who want to do free busy lookups for cross on-prem to V2. So Exchange 2010 has a very nice feature. Since the Office 365 is based on Exchange 2010, all you need is the paired Exchange 2010 on-premise to go across to do the rich coexistence where you can see the free busy between users on-prem and users in Office 365. Yeah, there is a limitation because 2010 introduced a specific multi-tenant capability that wasn't available in 2007. I specifically looked at this in our V1 service. Unfortunately, it would have been very difficult to put back in 2007. So at least I said, you got to put it in 2010. So they did that. So. Okay.
Any other questions?
All right.
No? All right.
All right, so thank you very much. Please fill out your